Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horick. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.
Welcome back to the show. Today we have Tarik Bolat. He's the co-founder and CEO at WaveSense. Tarik, welcome to the show.
Hi, Kevin. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. Selfishly, I love the space that you guys are in, but maybe before we get into what exactly you guys do at WaveSense, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Sure, yeah. So I grew up in the Bay Area in Northern California, sort of the cauldron then and still today of high technology startups. So really grew up around kind of business building and fast growing businesses.
Very cool. So you went to university. What did you take and why?
Yeah, good question. So I did a joint degree in economics and political science and a bunch of philosophy courses. So actually not really what you might think of as a traditional sort of technology founder, but those were subjects that I thought really melded well together in terms of how to think about the world and society and what was sort of going on at the time and how things might, develop in the future.
Interesting. Okay. So walk us through getting out of university, your career, getting your MBA, and then we'll dive into WaveSense.
Yeah, so graduated, went and did strategy consulting, like many graduates do. Learned a lot, cut my teeth there in terms of how to think about businesses from sort of a traditional analysis perspective, business development and strategy. Then ended up getting an MBA and really kind of shifted gears then to thinking about new business creation. How do you start businesses that are going to make a real dent in the world? How do you fund them? How do you staff them? How do you, build a customer base? And so really focused on that while in school. And then ultimately, after school, helped build a large renewable energy business that was headquartered in New York and San Francisco, really around some innovative ways to operate and finance huge wind and solar power plants. I think at one point we were sort of powering about 105,000 households or so.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
And those were power plants across the U.S. and Canada. And then from there, I had moved up to Boston, where WaveSense is based today. Where I live today. And, I had really enjoyed the technology and impact work that went on in renewable energy. And so I started looking around for sort of another step change technology that could really, if successful, drive a huge change in how we all live our lives today. And that's sort of what brought me to WaveSense.
Okay. So how did you discover what WaveSense has become, and what made you actually decide to pursue it as a business?
Yeah, so I learned, about some of the core technical work that had been done by my co-founder and our current CTO at MIT Lincoln Laboratory, which is a place where military R&D in effect goes on. That's administered by MIT. And he and his colleagues there had built a really impressive positioning technology, which was and is sort of the cornerstone work of our product today. And they had published a little bit about it, and to me it was one of the few instances of totally novel technology that would drive a real shift in perspective about how to solve an important problem, which is how do we make cars safer and higher performing. No one else was doing it. And so, I ended up reaching out to my now co-founder, and we sort of went from there.
So you didn't know each other at all before you guys became co-founders. Is that what I'm hearing correctly?
That's right, and that sort of runs against the common wisdom of that you hear in Silicon Valley and elsewhere about starting a
Sure.
company. Oftentimes the advice, and probably it's good advice, is to start a company with someone you know really well that you've worked with before. And that probably is true if you have that, but that sort of narrows uh, the the set of things you can really build. And so
Sure.
for us, we ended up having really complementary skill sets. Him being sort of the world expert in this technology, myself coming with sort of the business building skills, common vision for the company, and so it's ended up being a really productive partnership. As a result.
Very cool. So, what does WaveSense do, and how has it evolved over the last few years, especially coming out of research?
Yeah, so simplest way to think about what WaveSense does is that it enables cars to navigate autonomously, basically position themselves in a bunch of scenarios that today are not possible. And these are scenarios that I think your listeners will be familiar with. Things like today, if you're in your car and you're using a system that keeps you in your lane or tells you when you're
Yeah.
departing your lane, that's a system that you looks at lane markings to tell you that
Right.
information. Now, of course, lane markings are not always present, or they're faded, or they're confusing.
Yep.
And so, to say the least, we've all seen all sorts of different roads out there, and when that happens, that feature switches off, and that's a big source of frustration for folks that really want to rely on that feature. So WaveSense enables that feature to be on all the time. I'll talk a little bit about how we do that in a second. Similarly, things like parking a car autonomously, in a garage or in a parking lot, taking your car off road to do some really cool kind of trail creation and different features there, all the way through to what we would call full autonomy. What people think of when they think of a robotaxi or an autonomous vehicle. That vehicle needs to be able to operate in all sorts of conditions, whether it's snowing out, whether or not the car can see everything it needs to see on the surface. You need to be able to efficiently go from point A to point B and really earn the public's trust that you're going to do that in a safe and reliable way every time. And those are some of the things that WaveSense is enabling today.
Very cool. So, how is your technology similar and different from other providers? Because you just mentioned something about, obviously, like if you're scanning the lane markings on the ground, like how is that similar to what you guys do, or different?
Yeah, it's a great question. So all of the sensors that you would see today, which would typically be a radar or a camera, in the case of lane markings, or something called a LiDAR, which is just a sensor that uses light to characterize the surface. All of those are looking at different things around the surface. And that's how we as humans drive cars. We look around, we see what's going on around us when we make decisions. What's really challenging about that from a sort of robotics perspective or a sensors perspective is that the surface area around us is always changing. Things never really look quite the same. Very unpredictable environment. And sometimes two different things can look the same in a way that confuses you. So if I see two identical stop signs, for instance, I need to know, is that the stop sign on the corner of Peachtree Ave, or is that the stop sign on the corner of Birch Ave? And so what we've done is invent a totally new perspective of how to generate the same types of outputs, which is we've created a radar, something called a ground positioning radar, that images the subsurface of the road. So we're talking about looking 10 feet into the road with this special radar we've designed. And that basically is giving you a fingerprint. You can think of it as, same sort of reliability of a fingerprint and uniqueness of a fingerprint of what's going on below the surface. And a lot of folks ask me, well, okay, that's cool, but why would you do that? What's the benefit of doing that? And the benefit is that you're basically creating a map or a fingerprint of the subsurface that is stable over very, very long time periods and always looks unique, always looks different from inch to inch of road. What that means is that once you've created that fingerprint, you can then track to it and know exactly where you are to the centimeter level. Almost like, you can think of it as like you've created a type of railroad tracks beneath the road. You've got a very unique you've got a very unique map that's going to tell you exactly where you are as you sort of glide along the road. And that's true whether or not it's snowing, it's sunny, it's raining, you have lane markings or not. That subterranean fingerprint is always going to look the same.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next question, is like, how does weather factor into that? But yeah, that's actually really fascinating. Okay, so you're doing the subterranean radar. What other types of sensors and tracking and mapping do you guys do? Because it's more complicated than just that one type, correct?
Autonomous driving generally is you take a lot of different inputs from different sensors, hopefully each of which are generating different data from one another, independent data. What we've really focused on and are experts at is the creation of a couple of different things. One is the actual hardware, the actual radar unit itself. This is something that is going to go on millions of vehicles around the world. And so it's got to be really, really robust, small, lightweight, while also preserving very, very high performance. So we're experts at designing that radar. We're also experts at creating the map of the subsurface. So that's that's data, sort of a data expertise. And the algorithms that power sort of the navigational outputs of that map. And so it's sort of a hybrid that you don't see too often, which is that we've got the hardware, so the traditional kind of mechanical and electrical engineering, and then we've got software engineering, cloud engineering, because these maps are stored in the cloud and propagated to vehicles, as well as algorithms. And so it's a sort of neat, and one of the reasons why this is a really fun place to work, and why I'm coming to work every day is so great, is that it's multidisciplinary in the way that a lot of things aren't. And so that's sort of our domain of expertise. We leave things like camera and LiDAR to other folks who are experts at that, and who we feel we don't have differentiated advantage over.
Got you. Okay. So then when you're doing the autonomous stuff, how do you, because just driving obviously on a sunny day compared to a really cold and snowy and or rainy day is quite different. How does your technology kind of solve for those scenarios, right? Is it quite different, or walk us through that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the beauty of our product is that it unlike almost every other sensor, it isn't different. So when we create that subterranean fingerprint on a sunny day, and if you were then to look at that same fingerprint on a snowy day, for instance, it's going to look exactly the same because it's below the surface. It's not subject to falling snow, which causes sensors issues, or covered lane markings, which causes sensors issues. And so all that frenetic activity that happens on the surface, which is a source of real performance gaps for current technology, kind of falls away because it's always looking consistent and stable, regardless of what's going on the surface.
Okay, so you guys also work where GPS can't work. So how do you build something that basically, does it resync when it's back in a GPS available area, or how does that offline online kind of thing work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we can sort of think of GPS as sort of one of many different inputs into how one knows where they are. And so when GPS fades away or is choppy, we're just using different inputs to tell us our position. And so if it's available, that's great. We're gonna use that because we want to use everything possible to have as much data as possible to generate a position. But we've designed the system such that if that's not the case, and obviously that's not the case in many different types of environments, whether it's kind of urban canyons or tunnels or what have you, parking garages, you're still able to get a very high quality position.
Okay. And then if you're obviously your technology sitting under a car, how does that, like, you probably have to build it pretty rugged because, people go over a speed bump or run over something. Like, how do you guys handle kind of just it making sure it's tough enough to handle just the everyday kind of person, or being in a warehouse or something like that?
Yeah, so you design it to be very, very rugged. It's sort of in an enclosure or a
Okay.
casing. And that's actually a pretty well-worn path in automotive. Obviously, they're designing, suppliers and automakers are designing parts and vehicles to withstand, extreme temperature swings, a lot of, pounding from rocks and debris and what have you, as well as like just the test of time. And so that's something that we do today, and is an important piece of the puzzle. Some of the advantages of WaveSense's product is that there are no moving parts in it. So sometimes some sensors will have moving parts, and that's a real that means things are just going to break more often, typically. And it also doesn't need to be cleaned in the same way that an optical sensor would be. So if you have a camera, that can get dirt or dust on it or ice on it, what have you, rendering it useless. Similarly, with a LiDAR, that needs to be cleaned. And even some radars that operate in different frequency bands than we do, like the typical radars you have on a vehicle today that face forward, can get blocked by ice. The way that we've designed this sensor is that it's robust to all of that type of activity. And so you don't have to have the burden of cleaning it and maintaining the sensor, which, as a consumer in a vehicle, you really don't want to, you want the car to work. You don't really want to have to do things like clean sensors, if you can help
Sure.
it.
So what types of vehicles can WaveSense's technology be put on? Is it just traditional stuff? Is it kind of anything? Walk us through that.
Sure. So any types of vehicle cars, including autonomous vehicles. Similarly, long haul trucking is an application where we've seen a lot of interest and activity, where you want to make the driver's job easier, by automating as much of the journey and steering as possible. And reducing sort of driver fatigue. Similarly, we see applications in areas like mining vehicles, warehouses and distribution centers, which are becoming increasingly automated. Anything where you have a vehicle that needs to move around autonomously, you can envision this working very, very well. Again, because you're just looking at a simple fingerprint that isn't going to change. You can imagine another example that we see is like ports. Like ports are really challenging for autonomous vehicles because the environment is just different shipping containers moving around all the time. Never looks consistent.
Right.
So you can use this and that example for autonomous vehicles at ports, where you can look at the subsurface fingerprint, and operate in that environment.
Okay, so let's go with your port example. If I have, say, I don't know, 10 vehicles at a port and they are all in driving around, can they share data that somebody else has picked up? And does that data get merged? So I know that today there's no shipping container in this area, so I can autonomously drive there, but tomorrow there's a shipping container there and I can't. Like, walk us through that kind of stuff, or do you guys handle that?
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of position information sharing that you can generate as a result of this. So like one way to think about it is that if I'm in vehicle A and you're in vehicle B, those and they're generating very precise positions, they can communicate those positions to one another and ensure that they're never going to hit each other. Just as an example. Similarly, I can confirm where the vehicle has been. So let me give you an example. Like, have we picked up this shipping container or not? You can verify that. You can very easily tell if the vehicle has been there, even if you might not have traditional means of location.
Interesting. Okay. So, And then I would assume then if it's a brand new port, for example, that's just built, you have to wait for one of the vehicles to actually go through or go over that section to collect that data, and then it gets shared everywhere else? Or how do you get that original data? It's just somebody's got to physically drive over that?
That's right. It's a great question. So you have to create a map-based technology. So you create the map. It's simply done by driving over the area that you want to then later be able to operate autonomously in. And then next times you go through that, you're able to track to that map.
Okay, interesting. Okay, because I could be totally wrong here, but from my understanding, how say like Google Maps works or something, is they're accurate within meters of something. So obviously, them trying to use that data to do some sort of autonomous driving through, say like a drive-through through a parking lot, that like you can't be meters. You guys are like insanely accurate. Like you basically know exactly where a car needs to be, and you can replicate that car taking that exact path within centimeters, correct?
That's right. So like
Okay.
if you think of like Google Maps as fleet, or any sort of typical GPS for that matter,
Yeah.
That's accurate, as you mentioned, within a few meters, which is great for directions,
Right.
but obviously doesn't work for an autonomous vehicle. You can't be 3 meters to the left or right or where you think you are, and operate safely. And so what we've done is create a way to create that centimeter level positioning, and most importantly, create that almost all of the time. So there are other technologies that can create that centimeter level position, but they have significant gaps. And so, just like, you wouldn't buy a car that didn't work in the rain or snow. You don't want to be buying a technology that only is going to work in these certain applications. You want something that works all the time.
Interesting. Do you want to give us some other examples of how people have leveraged your technology? Because we've just kind of scratched the surface of what your technology can do in different verticals.
Yeah, so there's a couple of really exciting ones. I mentioned doing things like in mining or trucking, warehouses, even things like forklifts, mapping utilities. So like this is not a positioning based application, but a byproduct of creating these maps is that you're able to say, hey, where are the gas lines or the water pipes? To a shocking degree, utilities don't actually have very good map data about where precisely their buried infrastructure assets are. And so there's been a lot of interest in what I would call kind of like subterranean predictive maintenance and like mapping for different types of applications.
So completely outside of a vehicle then, right? Or just like a little handheld kind of thing?
No, so this would be the handheld things exist today. The difference here is that we're mapping at very large scale very quickly.
Okay, got you.
And so like if you want to know like where, you for a utility will often know like where the main line is running down a highway, but as it gets distributed into a neighborhood, for instance, there's much poorer location data for that.
Got you. Interesting. Okay. And then the other thing you guys have on your website that I thought was kind of interesting is the kind of like little delivery robot type stuff. Do you want to talk about how that's similar and different to putting it in a car, for example?
Yeah, definitely. So what's interesting about that is that those are like sidewalk delivery robots, which are being developed by some of the really large logistics companies out there.
Sure.
And what they want to do is have something that can navigate, down a sidewalk, which it turns out is actually a really hard thing to do because there's folks walking on the sidewalk. You're oftentimes sidewalks are against buildings, and so there's poor GPS. And so for that application, it's really simply being able to say, okay, this is a really hard environment to generate a precise position in, but if we're using a WaveSense product, we're able to do that. And so it sort of opens up what's possible in terms of where things can be delivered efficiently.
So how does that work then? If a company's using one of these delivery robots and there's a ton of pedestrian traffic on the sidewalk, how does it know how to like navigate around them and kind of get back on track?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we would map the width of the sidewalk that would be pre-mapped, and then it would be using its cameras or other, surface
Okay.
trained sensors, basically, that are doing something called perception, what's called in the industry perception, which is going to say, there's someone, 10 feet ahead of me. I better list to the right or list to the left, and go
Okay.
around them. But that whole time you're going to be on your map, so you're going to know the delivery robot in this case will know exactly where it is that whole time, which is very important for it to do, so that it doesn't, go off track.
Sure. And then if there's some sort of issue, does a human get a notification to say like this is stuck, you need to manually get it back on course kind of thing, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I mean, typically, as far as I understand it, and we don't, ourselves run these delivery networks, but I believe if there's an
Right.
issue in some of the testing they're doing in the field today, if someone's watching that very closely and it gets flagged.
Okay.
Uh, when it's high volume deployed, we're gonna have to start to think a little bit more creatively about how do you minimize issues, and then how do you address them when they arise.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious. I think a lot of people that have tried kind of anything autonomous or some of the technology that we've talked about today, at least I found with myself, I got very comfortable sitting in, letting the car drive itself pretty quickly. Within, probably like a minute or two of it happening, I felt comfortable, which I thought would take a lot longer. And that technology is nowhere near close to the accuracy that you guys are doing. So how have you found people's confidence of your guys' technology? They might be maybe a little skeptical at first, but how has it kind of evolved over time, especially as they've been using it more and more?
Yeah, so I think, we've, like with any new technology, and what WaveSense is doing really is novel. Like most automakers haven't heard of this method until we,
Sure.
educate them about it for doing positioning. And so, what we've done, hopefully a good job of, is building the confidence of the automakers. This is a really, really robust product. And in the same way that you can get comfortable in a car that's, doing lane keeping on a sunny day, the expectation and hope here and plan is that that's still going to be true if there's snow out. And it's sort of, it takes sort of a leap of imagination to get there, because I think a
Right.
lot of us are like, okay, if it's sunny out, I can imagine that. I can imagine being comfortable. But if it's, snowing out, let's say, maybe not. But I think if we were to rewind ourselves, visit a version of ourselves 10, 15 years ago, we would probably have a hard time imagining how comfortable we would get in the vehicles that are, routinely available today, and some of the autonomous features on them. And so, people, I think humans with high performing technology get comfortable with it very quickly. It sounds like that was your experience as well.
Yeah, yeah. It was actually like shocking to me. I think it still kind of shocks me, and it's been a number of years since I like truly tried it. And it's interesting, just like how fast I was totally fine with it, and on the highway, like so. I don't know, it's just or the freeway. It was interesting, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So I think just people just need to try it, experience it, and then they realize like, wow, this is actually works really well. Um, and it's come a long way since I even tried it a number of years ago. Which actually kind of leads me to my next question is, how do you guys actually push updates, and what is the lifespan of your product? Because obviously some people own a vehicle for a few years to a decade, maybe a couple decades, depending on where they're putting or like what type of vehicle this is getting installed on.
Yeah, so in terms of the lifespan, maybe we'll talk about that first. The hardware is designed, to be on vehicles for the life of the vehicle, and will
Okay.
be so designed when it hits production. In terms of the actual capability, what's really exciting about our product is that it's always getting better, because we are, in addition to creating maps ourselves, once this is on, passenger vehicles, drivers also becomes a mapper, and so there's this sort of crowdsourced effect,
Right.
and you're always getting bigger and better coverage. And so, unlike most products in automotive that depreciate once you buy them, you walk off the lot. I forget what the exact saying is, but you walk off the lot and the car loses 10% of its value.
Yeah.
This is a product that's gaining in value with every year because the functioning and capability is growing as more folks use it on the roads. That encourages more folks to want to have it. It gets better, and so there's this positive feedback loop that's in effect.
Interesting. So is it possible to get access to my car's data, or and what I'm getting at is, if I'm in an accident, for example, and it's my fault or it's the other driver's fault, like, could I use your technology to prove whose fault it is? Because it's like, well, no, Kevin was speeding. It was clearly his fault. Or, like, do you know what I'm getting at there?
Yeah. So I don't think like we're giving a positioning input, and so you can
Okay.
I don't think that this is going to give you more data from a sort of liability or fault
Okay.
perspective than like a GPS might. But
Okay.
certainly, I think the goal here, and one of the reasons we started WaveSense, back in 2017, was to actually really improve road safety, so we don't actually have to have these types of accidents anymore. I mean, I think
Gotcha.
that there are roughly 40,000 road fatalities in the U.S. every year, and a lot of those can be avoided with much better technology that assists human drivers in driving safely and making the right on-road decisions.
Yeah, I guess it's more like, and the perfect example of that is like the auto braking kind of thing. If you're getting too close, right? Like,
Exactly.
you're doing more stuff like that than just saying like, well, Kevin's speeding. It's like, no, just before he hits something, let's just make sure he doesn't hit something. It's like a whole shift, right? Of
Yeah.
mindset. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So then, how much data are you collecting per second? Or like, because you guys got to be collecting a ton of data constantly.
Yeah, so we don't sort of publicly release database sizes, but we've figured out a way to make this sort of automotive grade and automotive ready in a way that permits sort of over-the-air updates, an expansion of the map. Obviously, data on the vehicle is really important, and
Yeah.
it's sort of another form of sort of real estate, so to speak. And
Okay.
so, our job is to make sure that our data size and rates are compatible with what the automakers can stomach.
Got you. Okay. And then, yeah. Okay. Interesting. And then, does it have like a SIM card, or how does it actually sync and connect to data?
Yeah, so all of the map data is stored locally on the vehicle, and the reason for
Okay.
that is that we don't want to be pinging a remote database for something like this, where the car is
Right.
relying on the information for autonomous decision making.
Okay.
And so the way that it works is that you've got sort of the core maps factory loaded onto the vehicle, and then you're periodically going to get updates of those maps and expansions of the map over the
Okay.
air. But it's not like you're doing some real-time sort of cloud synchronization for real-time performance.
Got you. Okay. Interesting. And then, yeah, obviously, like, if I'm using this underground, I'm clearly not getting updates then, right? Like, the vehicle has to come out and then it does it, kind of thing.
In terms of like updates on the map, that's a process where from the crowdsourced perspective, the vehicle collects the maps, it shares those back with the central database over the air. Those are
Okay.
verified,
Yeah.
and then propagated back down to the user.
Got you. Okay. Very cool. So I'm curious then, where do you kind of see the state of the industry? Because in my best guess, I would say we're still pretty early on, and there's like a ton of stuff that we can still do. Or what do you think where we're at in the state of the industry?
Yeah, so I sort of break the industry down into assisted driving features that are autonomous or autonomous-like,
Okay.
and then full autonomy, which is sort of the robo-taxi industry. And there's been a really interesting dynamic at play, which is that there's been so much talent and smarts and capital put behind the fully autonomous industry over the last 10 years or so. And while they haven't, while we don't have, autonomous taxis crawling all over the streets of every major American city yet, we have seen a radical increase in performance of software and hardware and compute in a way that has sort of come back to passenger vehicles and enabled them to be much more capable. So there's this sort of symbiotic relationship, which is that even though we're not there yet on full autonomy, the traditional vehicles are now able to leverage a lot of that work because there's a human driver still behind the wheel, and you can do all sorts of newfangled autonomous features that probably wouldn't be possible without the excitement and momentum behind full autonomy.
Interesting. Could you use your technology for some sort of like flying aircraft, because or not really?
Not you wouldn't use this on an aircraft for some of these vertical take. Like you need to be on the close to the ground to use this. So
Okay.
to the degree that it's useful while the aircraft is on the ground, you can use it, but it's not like you can be 100 meters in the air and
Okay.
at least in its current iteration.
Got you. Okay, that's kind of what I assumed, but then I was like, well, maybe just because if you know where I kind of am, you could just. But yeah, no, that it makes sense. Interesting. Okay, so do you have any other predictions or thoughts around how fast we're going to start actually seeing some of this stuff actually make it into? Obviously, it's in some of the higher end cars, but maybe even the more kind of mid-range or entry-level cars. Is that coming in the next like 3 to 5 years? It's going to take longer, or what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I can tell you, we're working with some of the largest automakers in the world right now, and their plans are not just to put this on luxury vehicles. It may start there, but the plan is really to ensure that there is, it might be different levels of functionality and features, but they're going to power their sort of mid-level and economy class vehicles with some of the same technology and capabilities that exist on that are maybe targeted for the premium segment to start with.
Interesting. So if you guys release another version of the actual physical sensor, can I upgrade it, or is that just kind of like, no, that's made for my vehicle, that's it?
Yeah, we don't really envision. It's hard to swap things out once they're in the field.
Okay.
But that said, we are going to like the real improvements from a user perspective come in the form of map expansion and modules or features, all of which are software driven. And so while you may not have, if you have a 7-year-old car with WaveSense's product on it, at some point in the future, there will be a new hardware release. But what you really care about is that it started off with highway driving, and now it includes, parking in the 1,000 most popular parking garages in America. Or it started with highway driving, and now it covers the metro area that you live closest to. That's kind of the lift that you really want from a user perspective.
Yeah. Okay. So how do you guys manage that though? Because as somebody that just builds software for the web, and I've done a little bit of hardware stuff, just trying to get your web app updated and working across all the browsers is challenging enough. Never mind a bunch of vehicles, some that are brand new, some that are a few years old. How do you guys manage that, or what advice do you give to people getting into the industry? Because that's got to be astronomically challenging.
Yeah, so it's a couple of things. I think, thing one is that we have been fortunate enough to build a team of some of the brightest minds, in the world in this sector.
Sure.
And they're able to build products that are scalable and that are able to stand the test of time. from a hardware and from a software perspective. We also ensure that we have really tight, transparent relationships with the automakers that we work with, so that as we think about planning together for the future, we ensure that this is compatible, not just for the first year that you drive off the lot, but for year 7 and year 10 and year 12. And so as we're planning with them and looking at what the future looks like when this is on roads, that's a really big part of it. And that's not just for products like WaveSense. They think about this, long-term planning for everything that they release. And so that's been an important, I think, learning for us, and something that we would really advocate to folks in this space: have really tight, transparent relationships with your customers.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That's very cool. But we're kind of coming to the end of the show. So how about we close with mentioning where people can get more information about WaveSense and anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, so our website is www.wavesense.io, and we are actively, building a team here. So for folks that might be interested in joining it, we've got a careers page there, and really excited to make some big announcements. We hope later this year and into next year around the company, and some of the progress that we've made.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Kevin. Really fun to be on with you.
Thank you. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horik. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.